Erica?
I don't know. This is not the
Blakely. Recording in progress. So today's meeting is just to give us a chance to get a bit more information before we make the decision tomorrow. If we don't make the decision tomorrow, we go out to the 28th, which again just kicks the can down the road on Wapna. And Russell and his team need to get started fairly quickly there. So I just want him to give us a little bit more options or advice around option 1A, which was the sort of halfway step between sort of bowling it all over, which was option 1, and option 2, which is please leave some of it behind. But the other thing that's come out in the report for tomorrow, you'll notice, is the issue of the columns. And so Russell, we just need some advice on that fairly sharply, because it says that the columns are under 34% earthquake prone, which means given that it's right on a pedestrian crossing on a state highway, I think we've got some issues there. But the caveat in the report does say it depends on the foundations which were constructed. So I guess we'll need, I mean, we don't need to make a decision tomorrow about the columns. That could be an independent decision for later, but just, I guess, signaling that for those that wanted to remove the columns, that's probably going to put a smile on their face, and those that didn't. But the earthquake prone issue is definitely an issue.
12.5 years though.
Sorry?
12.5 years.
20.
You do. You're quite right. In fact, 12.5 years is the time you'd have to strengthen them or remove. But it's like quite a few issues we've had around the museum, which technically was 25 years, but you still have the emotional issue that what happens if you get an earthquake and there's 5 people standing there wait to go over the lights and one of the pillars falls on them. And you've known about it.
Yeah,
You've got that long to rectify, but there is still that liability issue.
yeah.
I think if you don't have drawings of the foundations, then it'd be the case every building in the world would be considered earthquake prone.
Sure. Yep. But the 25 criteria does allow, it does mention arterial roads as well, which brings it down to class 1, which is what it would be. It would be 12.5 years if we decided to leave it and strengthen it, but just something to factor in when we get to it. And that could be something we discuss at the 28th meeting of council. If you can get it back to us by then, Russell. Yeah, thank you.
Could we shift them to, I don't know, outside somebody's chateau and bluff?
But don't start
We
with
could use them to pull that.
Oh,
Yeah,
right?
Maybe some talk back coast.
see you
See
later.
how stable they are.
Oh, you're
Maybe in the garden.
so Russell, if you can lead us through what we discussed yesterday, was the whole issue around
Do you want to, because like Maria wasn't here, do you want to
oh
give a bit of
sorry
background
sorry
to how we
so
got here?
I'll just flick you this round, Ria, if you want to come and get it.
Oh, she's got a copy.
Oh, you've got a copy of that?
Yeah.
So one of the suggestions we had last week was leave the clock exactly where it is. You can structurally take everything out either side of it, the whole lot, which gives you the visual. Whether you'd want to leave the clock there is one issue, but you could get a bus down the right side and you could have pedestrians on the left-hand side as you look at the clock. The flip side of that is that down the right-hand side now, as you look at the diagram, the old McKillick's building there is Heritage 1, and it's got a veranda that comes out over the top, which complicates things. So Jeff owns that. So we'd have to, if we wanted to go down that path without moving the clock, we would probably have to get a consent in to remove just the veranda part. So Russell may or may not wish to talk about that as well. So that was the option between 1 and 2, really. 3 seemed to be off the table. So quite a few of the submitters Ria came in and said that they wanted the historical use to be maintained. And we had quite a bit of debate with them about, so what is it going to be used for? Because it's used for nothing at the moment. And they suggested, well, why don't you get school choirs and to sing that? And John Green was here, and his advice was, which I think most of us supported, was we've moved the central city away from Wapna Place. It's not ideal sitting on an arterial street. And if we were going to have choir singing, we'd have them in the middle of their street, not in Wapna Place. But the wind tunnel effect is still an issue. People are still opposed to that. Fair to say that if you look at the reflection of the people here yesterday, and being an older person, I can say this.
Yesterday was Sunday.
Sorry?
When you say yesterday, you're saying Sunday?
No, when we had the last,
Sorry, yesterday, I'm like, yesterday, Sunday.
Oh.
You mean that last week?
Last week.
last week, yeah. So very much people of my age predominantly coming in who have that historical tie. Although the historical tie hasn't been there that long. And what the place is after Mr. Wackler, not Mrs. Wackler. But there's still an emotional tie there for some of the older people. But again, on the flip side of it, we didn't get anything from the younger people. We've got to be thinking about how do we future-proof our city if there's no use. So a lot of mixed feelings came through. And so one of the things I suggested was, could we go somewhere between 1 and 2 and potentially just leave the clock there, which is for some of them it is an important thing, and the pillars were important for some as well. And just go either side. So when you're looking at that, the buses would go down the right side and the pedestrians would come down the left side. So that means they're coming past the eateries. So we don't have buses anywhere near the eateries, but we have the foot traffic by the eateries. So it's a win-win. Russell will tell you about his desire not to have a street on the other side that only has footpaths down one side, but we'll have some discussion about that today. Floor's yours, Russell.
Thanks for the opportunity. And I guess the challenge that I face is, I guess, a twofold. One is the first is not to introduce new material, because I guess part of what you are doing is, as I understand it, is receiving information from the public consultation approach, and as a consequence needing to deliberate and then actually make a direction. And I guess that the report that you'll have received actually looks to actually set some of those directions on the way past. But what I've been asked a little bit to do is to comment on, I guess, some of the, interactions with the how things would work around the clock. And the clock sits, it doesn't sit actually in the middle of the street. If you look at it, it actually sits offset. And if you look from the external, you would actually see that you either need to go to one side or the other. Obviously, that's the suggestion from the mayor is saying is, how do you leave the clock there? You have to go, if you go to the north side, you have a gap between the clock and McKillop's building of about just over 5 meters. A bus itself would typically be no wider than around 2.4, which sounds quite a lot, but typically the lanes that a bus would operate in is around the 3.5 to 4 meters would be a normal sort of bit of space around them to make some room. The bus would be 4.2 meters wide, so we'd need to make a reasonably big hole in there to get the bus through. So it just wouldn't be to take the glass screen out, would actually to go vertically. One of the concerns that I would have is that as you drive through there, you end up pointing at at where the normal people would be walking on the north side of the, if you were walking from Levin Street to D Street. At the moment, that's typically, we would have a footpath on both sides. And I guess that would be one of my concerns. You would actually have the potential of, as a bus came through there, you would, as a pedestrian, you might well find you'd be standing there and here comes a bus at you. So that's a reasonable big concern. One of the things that you may not necessarily be aware of is that before the hours of the library are open, anybody who uses our Levin Street building, which is about 200 plus people who park there, actually have to go out of the building to Levin Street and then circulate around to get to the city centre if that's where they're going with their car park. So I guess if you're working at the railway, you wouldn't have to, but if you're working anywhere, you have to walk around. So there's quite a few people who do walk up and down Esk Street West as such, and accordingly that is, I guess, a pedestrian route. Why I would be suggesting that you'd have a footpath on both sides, it is the normal structure of your city centre. Otherwise it becomes very centric about the hotel on one side. So if you're wanting to walk from wherever on Levin Street or down to Levin Street, you may not want to walk past their doors. So that's why I would have I guess, a little bit of a concern for the bus taking that space. You have to also remember, if you put the bus on one side, you've got to take the other side out to actually let the pedestrians or the visitors from the hotel who want to exit the hotel, who want to come up to the city, because you're not going to use the same space. So the clock tower is going to sit right in the middle of the street if that's your desire. So that's a possible solution. And I guess that's the challenge to say, is that the right solution? The alternative solution is obviously the one to actually remove the clock tower, and therefore you would actually have the buses going in the position where the clock is. I do think if you're there, if you notice where the 1A option with the buses are, it's relatively north of the area. So the area that would be, I guess, left of the current space that's widely known as Wagner Place would be reduced quite a lot because the arc to get out there is quite a wide arc to get there. So you actually consume quite a bit of that. I guess that space that John Green showed, if you could recall his diagram, he sort of had a blue diagram, which is the space left behind, which you could develop into a Wagner Place use in the future. Some form of passage for a vehicle through it, and then you've got your area in front of the restaurants that you could use as an outdoor dining area. So I think there are some compromises to actually bring it to the north side of the clock. I'm not sure that they are all good compromises, but they are compromises that you have to consider. What the report seeks to do is to say, will you allow buses through Wagner Place and bring back some design options that actually show you some real detail? Because at the moment, we are playing a little bit with a reasonably thick pencil on a pad, and we do need some design consideration to say, what is the turning circle? Are we getting it right? What does it look like coming out the other side? In terms of the veranda, the mayor's correct that it would need a resource consent to remove it from the building. Jeff Thompson, who is the owner of the building, has generally indicated that would be acceptable. However, like all good developers, he would be seeking some conditions as part of that, which aren't impossible, which I think relate to him being able to modify the building slightly to double glaze it and things like that, that it's part of the heritage status of the building would have to be considered. So those are quite possible actions, and I don't think the veranda is such that it's actually a significant issue.
Is that the building to the south side or the north side?
The north side, it's the old, what we describe as the old McKillop's building. McKillop's
You can see it on the pictures.
It's the last one standing, to be fair, that's there, so.
So Russell,
So if the lot was taken out, the veranda wouldn't be part of the conversation.
I would anticipate if the choice was to remove the clock or relocate the clock, the building veranda would stay.
So we wouldn't have to do anything about it.
so Russell, just before we get into a whole lot of questions, just 2 or 3 things to reflect
Sorry.
on. So your opening statement was the issue that we technically bring forward another option that we haven't consulted on. So we have a precedent for that, just so that you sleep well tonight for tomorrow's meeting. Back in the last term, midway through the last term, we had the issue of what do we do with the museum? The paper that we put to the community was strengthen it and reopen it or rethink. 85% said strengthen, reopen it. We didn't do either that or the rethink. We voted for a new museum. When I say we, that wasn't me, but so we've set a precedent. And I think if we've listened to consultations, it's reasonable for a council to tweak where we go to, I think.
Can I just make a comment on
Sure.
the process? So it doesn't necessarily, depending on the scale of what you're doing, have to be something that you've consulted on, but what you consider can be something that was put forward during consultation or submissions. If you were going way off piste from where you were, then somebody might say, oh, well, that wasn't what you consulted on. But if you are responding to a suggestion that's come forward, you can say that that is listening to consultation.
My next comment is the issue of having the footpath down both sides of the street. So just some feedback for you on that one. If I was coming from the City Council car park around the bottom and up through that space, I would definitely not walk on the north side. And the logic for that is if you leave this building and go to Wagner Place, the scariest place you cross over is over the road directly opposite the H&J car parks, because when you walk over there, cars don't see you. And so if you put a footpath down that side, on that north side, you're going to go right over the opening of his car park. And people by nature who are coming out and turning that way, turning towards the railway station, are not going to be noticing people coming from the left. I think it would be better just have a single footpath.
But equally beside that car park, there's an alleyway which comes out beside the Spates Ale House.
Which is what I use when I.
Yeah,
walk
Yeah,
that
and
way.
that's the most obvious. I mean, it's directly beside the thing,
Yeah.
and maybe we could beautify that.
Very obvious that it's
But
there.
you come through there and
I think also, I mean, we've defended the taking buses across the pavement at Walking Place on the basis that it will only happen 5 times a day. I mean, exactly the same argument would apply to the little pavement on the north side of which is, you know, which would only have that issue 5 times a day. You know, and I would have thought that was a much smaller issue than the issue of running a bus across Walking Place.
What
So-
pavement are you talking about there, Tom?
So at the moment, we're planning to run buses over Walking
Yeah,
Place.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
pavement.
Well,
basically.
no,
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
not
yeah.
planning
The bus
it.
is
It's
gonna
one of
run.
the- We're not planning it, Tom. It's one of the options.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's either option 1 or what option 1A would run a bus across the pavement, which is part of Walking Place, and through the gap.
Yeah.
So you remove the pavement completely 5 times a day. We're talking about pretty much exactly the same thing. If there's a pavement on the north side of the clock tower, it's no different. But also, if the bus is only 2.4 meters wide and the gap's 5 meters wide, I don't see why you couldn't have an narrow pavement there anyway.
4.8 meters or 4.2 on it, bus.
That's bus is 4.2 meters high. So,
Oh,
so I guess what I'd be saying is that where a bus goes through the middle of Walking Place, you have quite a wide area, and it's through a big wide space, whereas this is actually through a gap.
Mm.
And I guess that's the piece that I think would actually be constrained. And you're correct, a slow moving bus
oh, yeah.
will itself be not a conflict, but I think it would be a different surprise. It would be something you would see. It would be something that would feel a little bit different.
There's no way you could trigger a warning light. Couldn't you, as the bus runs over
You
there?
certainly could have a buzzer like H&J Smith's would outside their
Yeah.
doorway would drive you nuts and beep at you all day. But the other things you could add to mitigate it. But once again, it's still that principle that you're going through a gap beside a clock.
I think we're getting 101 ways to
Okay,
remove the
hang on,
clock,
hang on,
to be
we-
honest.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it
Why don't we
one
just
at
move
a
the clock?
time. Do it one at a time, otherwise Russell can't keep up with the questions. So just,
Oh, nobody asked, so I put my hand up.
I know, I'm coming to you, Alan, just
Liberally. so-
I'll slow this down so you can have your say.
Better.
So Russell, I just can't understand the principle of having a gap. And that's not say we won't remove the clock, or that won't be one of the options, as Leslie said. But if we leave the clock there to have a gap that we encourage a bus to go through, knowing that potentially there's pedestrians coming in the same space. But I guess that's more unease.
I think all these things can work so long as that's the compromise you want to make. And I guess part of what my job is to bring you both sides of that story to make sure that you actually see as a balanced position. Would it work if it was your only choice? Yes, I guess it's one of the choices that you have,
Yeah.
and that's the issue that you need to work. Part of the consultation process has been to say, do we want to bring buses across Walking Place? That's really the first choice, and how that works, whether it be to the north of the clock, to the south of the clock, where the clock is just another variation of each of those. And you are correct that each of those could work with a degree of compromise. We could make each of those work in some area. And I guess what you've also got to watch is that what do you get left after you've done that is what I would be suggesting. What is the place that you actually get once you've finished? And I guess that's the challenge that we face. If you wanted the clock to go to the north, could it be designed? Yes, it could be.
Alan,
Right. The way I think of it is, if you look at Christchurch, you've got Cashel Street, which has got trams running through it from time to time, intermittent trams. Yet the rest of the time when those trams aren't running, it's a great pedestrian space, and there doesn't seem to be an issue. They do ding a bell every now and then, sort of thing. And I see what we should be. I think what we should be doing here is something similar. Obviously not with trams, but with that's how the bus would work. So I would be for putting footpaths on both sides, having it as a nice precinct, this pedestrian friendly, a bit like S Street that we have now, and I'd move the clock somewhere else. What is that? It's just so simple.
Problem is, the clock would never get moved. It would get moved to store
Well,
it back
it's
in
up to us,
water,
Tom.
and you'd never see it again.
It's up to us then to make sure that it does get moved. We are the city council.
I'd like to see it in the-
yeah, hang on, we'll have too many conversations here.
Wash your
Trish,
mouth out.
I think we're
I mean, today's, but
Agree.
listen, today is not about us having the discussion. That
Sure.
tomorrow is about the discussion. Today is the questions for Russell.
We would have to consider also, Russell, if the bus was on the north side, which is what I had thought I wanted. Where does that sit when the cars are coming out of the,
Sorry?
out of the car park?
The bus would travel through the gap on the north side, and then it would transition back to the left. So
Is there not an opening at the from the car park at the scene?
no, the opening for the car park is right down by the Railway Hotel end.
Yeah.
It's an in and
Yeah,
an out
amazing.
down that end, and
Thank you.
Um,
Grant.
You've distracted me now.
Multitask.
Yeah, it's gone.
Go on, excellent. While he's thinking about it, Leslie's got one for you.
Thank you. So remind me, Russell, just to bring it back into the conversation. What's so terrible about buses using Leven Street? Well, you know, our first decision is, do we put buses through Wapna Place at all? So what's the problem really with Leven Street?
the principle there will be that the developer wishes for them to be outside the front door.
And that's the only statement anyone has ever come up with. So I was wondering if you had another transport statement that made a difference there.
No, and I guess that's why we developed those options to present in the consultation document, because we wanted to make sure that all the options that I guess the wider public would have asked from us have been explored. But during the assessment of the area, we came up with about 7 or 8 different options, which sort of were vaguely usable in that area, and we focused those down to 3. So we had 2A and Esk Street and all sorts of things, and we really refocused those down to those 3 options that were put forward in the consultation document.
So to sum up, the only reason we're considering putting buses through Wapna Place is because the developer would like that as their most preferred option.
They can't turn in this street.
So I can help contribute to that, I guess, because I'm in favour of option 1 or 1A. And I think that even if we had option 2, which is to pull in off Leven Street and have some sort of shelter there, because there is space there for it, or alternatively, he does a 3-point turn, backs into his front door, which is not ideal in a hotel anyway. But even if he had that, what do we do with Wapna Place? Because at the moment, if you leave that huge structure sitting there, people coming out of the hotel are going to see the back end of that, which is just disgusting beyond belief. And they don't see S Street and what the potential it has there. So,
Yes, but
But why
but
couldn't
the
you just open it-
divorcing of the two things
Yeah.
is
Sorry?
why I am raising this is
Sure.
because the two things can be divorced. If the only reason we're even talking about putting buses through Wapna Place is because it's essentially the developer's preference,
Mm.
then if it was our council decision not to do that, because Leven Street is another logical thing to do, then yes, we do still have the conversation separately about whether there are some upgrades to Wapna Place. But you can actually divorce the two things. The first decision we've got is actually, do we put buses through Wapna Place or not? Is what's our council view on doing that?
I can see the other hands. I'll just respond to that, Leslie, I guess.
So sorry to interrupt.
No, it's all right.
No,
Look,
it's okay.
look, I hovered between 1 and 2 for quite some time, and you know where my home sits, so she's in 2. But I've been down there several times recently and looked from Leven Street upwards towards where we want people to be, which is in the CBD. And CBD is not Wapna Place, it's beyond. And if I was coming out of that hotel, I don't think I'd be attracted towards S Street, because it doesn't matter how much we paint Wapna Place up, it's still a big, big, solid piece of architecture that just sits there. It's a barrier.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Pania.
I'm just bouncing off your corridor there, Leslie. So, I mean, was there any consideration that the door based basically the railway station, Leven Street, was there any consideration for the yeah. And the other one is really around, there's nothing stopping us if we wanted to make it more attractive, open up one side of Wapna Place for people to walk through from the hotel and make it attractive.
So I think perhaps I could clarify. The question that I was asked was there any concern about the buses using, because S Street at the moment, prior to the development was a street that's open to traffic and was very non-people friendly. And I guess we've sort of suddenly gone to the step of saying was we don't want cars. Well, I guess you might have to also consider as part of that area, if the buses weren't there, that could be be returned to a car parking environment for access to and from the car park. So that could be what you're suggesting is, could a bus stop be added to Levin Street? Yes. Could it be returned to just the parking arrangements that were prior to that? Certainly. It's I think you've got to look at all those decisions. Does that actually bring value? Could it be opened up? There's a whole lot of those things. And that's really what we're saying is that the first question you do have to ask is whether the buses go through Watton Place.
Yep, and that will be tomorrow's absolute discussion. Because, hang on, I'll come to the end Trace, because I've got others as well. We will have to make a decision on 1 versus 2, I suspect. And then if the majority are in favour of 1, then the next question will be, do we modify 1 or do we just leave it as 1? The 1 the way it is at the moment, which is basically flatten everything and create this end of it, Air Street, down the other end. Same sort of thing. Shared spaces, which is what they've got in Queenstown and all their inner city streets in Queenstown. The whole lot of are all this shared space where you can take a vehicle through the middle very slow. I think it's about 5 Ks or something like that. And people sit around and mingle. So it's not pedestrian at the cost of vehicles or the other way around, it's both. But the traffic is so slow through all those 5 or 6 streets now that nobody goes through it. It's just not worth it. So I guess we will get to this tomorrow. Coming to it, Evelyn wanted to add one.
Kia ora, Russell. I mean, some of what I've been thinking has been said, but not to put too fine a point on it. I have stayed over the years at hotels that are heavily dependent on bus traffic. And I have talked to hotel owners and managers about the benefit of bus tours. They come in at 7 or bus 5 or 6 or whatever. They go to their rooms, they go and eat in the hotel dining room, and they're out again at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. So being sold the idea that they're going to go and riot around town and spend heaps and heaps of money at that time of the window of opportunity that they have is, I don't think, a valid comment, and we should actually think seriously about it as an argument. However, the other concern I had is in one of the designs that, and I've been looking, I can't actually find it now, but there was a drawing of the Port Cochere, which shows cars driving down the road on the left-hand side, which means that it looks like they entered from D Street. So whilst we're talking about buses, I don't think this is necessarily what everybody thinks is going to result out of all of this. Somebody somewhere thinks that cars are going to drive up and down that part and they're going to go and park under the Port Cochere. Or now they can do that if they come off Levin Street into lower, oh, thank you, Leslie, and turn around. But buses that come from Distinction hotels are coming from either Te Anau, where they could come down Levin Street, or they're coming from Dunedin or points north, where they could come in through the Crescent onto Levin Street. I'm totally opposed to this city altering things just for this purpose, when that's not where the design thinking of the inner city has been going. This is actually taking away from the pedestrian-friendly, citizen-friendly spaces that we've been developing in Esk Street and Don Street. It's not contributing to the greater beautification of D Street, which was going to be after finishing off Calvin Street. We're going to prioritise what is actually going to benefit basically one business. His Port Cochere, he is responsible for, and he owns both sides of the street. Why isn't the onus on Jeff to provide that visitor welcome in that lower S3 space without impacting on Wapna Place at all. Because it's not just Wapna Place, it impacts on D Street as well. And that's where I'm at.
You know, hang on, and just, and I guess, two things for tomorrow. I guess we have to be very careful that we don't tag Jeff in this. He's just a developer who we've encouraged to come into the city and brings tourists in. I don't personally believe that they'll be here late at night and gone first thing in the morning. Why would they come here if they weren't staying for some reason? They go to Tiana, they go out on trips. They go to Dunedin, they go out to the peninsula and other places. If you look at his hotel in Dunedin, classic example of how not to do it right. He's got it right down the wrong end of town. When I go and stay there, and I regularly do, I don't go out of the hotel because there's nowhere to go to. I quite like to go to the inner city and go to a movie, go to a restaurant, but it's up and over the hill and down the Octagon.
There's nothing.
And most days it's too bloody hard going, so I just stay in the hotel. So, yeah, I don't think he's going to bring them all the way from Queenstown or Tiana just to have an overnight here and be gone the following morning. I think the people will stay and we'll get some kickback into Bluff and to Stewart Island and places like that, to the Transport Museum. But never mind.
Can I add a little bit to that? Is that
Certainly.
I've included in the report the sections of what the Portishead does look like, so you can see what's being proposed. I guess the plans that we had seen to date hadn't necessarily shown where it was, what it looked like in elevation, and they've been included so you can get a good perspective of the scale of what's being proposed to where, because it does, to be fair, take a piece of the S Street in front of the hotel. It does mean that the space between the car park and the hotel becomes more car centric because there will be cars trying to do some maneuvers at times through there. And that's what the purpose of those cross sections in your report are there to actually help you understand that area in greater detail, so that as you consider that you have seen the information that's currently available.
I'll come to that, Peter. And just as a final reflection for me, we had a lot of debate about us taking something away and not replacing it. And I don't see what we're taking away, to be quite honest. I've gone down there again every lunchtime I can physically get there. Nobody is in Wapna Place, like nobody. And so what are we doing? We heard people say, oh, you should get your school choirs to go down. Look, if we can get a school choir to go and sing at the outcome in the middle of S Street, where it's nice and sheltered, and has a lot of foot traffic. Why would you go and sing in Wapna Place? Because nobody's going to come there. But, you know, Peter.
Spent a bit of time down at Wapna Place over the last 2 weeks, and
I haven't seen.
But-
What were you dressed in?
I was there with my anometer.
Yeah.
Okay, one option, what Russell, option 1 or 1A, the toilets will, in the changing room and there will showers remain the same or similar?
Yeah, they stay in.
There's no proposal to change. There's no proposal to change that. That doesn't preclude you enhancing, changing, or otherwise, should you so desire, as some further development in the future. But there is the current what we put on the table at the moment. There is no change to those areas.
So Peter, we earlier had a meeting, at one of our earlier meetings, we discussed that, and the intention was to leave them there because people that are rough sleepers things use the showers. So there's no intention to take that away.
Are they the ones that aren't
Sorry?
blacklisted or trespassed?
Yeah, well, it does create some issues. I understand that.
From the toilet.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Tom, and then Trish.
This is a
Then go
question. My view was that I supported Laban Street because it was the least cost. In fact, I don't see why it should be any cost to the city to do it, and at a time when we're trying to save money. So certainly the least disruptive to the city. Now, I think when we went out to public consultation, and when you read, what the public said, their concern, they supported option 2. They did not support option 1, and overwhelming numbers they supported option 2. But their main concern, I think, when I read it, was about protecting the clock tower, which is more loved than I think we realise, and even a lot of people who wanted to protect the columns So in my mind, I suppose I had kind of come around to option 1A in the sense that maybe it was a compromise where you could protect those heritage things that people want to protect, and yet at the same time provide good access to the city. So my question, coming to that question, is on a straight, let's say a black line basis, right? Is option 1A possible?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
Trish.
I think we have to remember that we have to pull up Wapna Place regardless, because we've got infrastructure that needs replacing. So even if we wanted to leave it as it was, it's not going to be that way. So it seems sensible to do something. And I have been in the city for 65 years. I had never
Since you were
been to-
10. Well, that's
No,
good.
I was in the country before that. I have never been to a function
Yeah.
at Wapna Place. That may be me, but I'm just saying that I am also part of the community, and that's been my experience. And when I travel and stay in hotels, I never eat at hotels, ever. I always go and find a place.
Yep.
So that's, I'm just saying, for Evelyn, that's a different view from what you have.
Oh, tour buses tend to have packages. It's
been on tour
different than
buses.
being a a freedom traveller. That was my point, which
No,
is what
yeah.
came from hotel managers, but I respect your point too.
Yeah, yeah.
So Russell, I'll see all the hands. Russell, the other thing you raised was about going to the right of the clock where the road into the north side of Wapna. And again, my observation is the what little traffic there is that sits in Wapna doesn't sit on the north side because it's shaded. So you notice the seats down at the moment, they've all got green slime all over them. And to me, that would have been an ideal place to maybe put a small eye centre in that space. So we wouldn't need as much there, where maybe having a little bit more on the south side would be a bit better.
I think what I was really referring to is if you think about the path that a bus would sweep between D Street and there, the further you go north, the more of that wide area is consumed. And I guess just in the paper, we speak a little bit about, we talk about Wapna Place being the whole area, but I guess there's several parcels there. There's the section which used to be the Smith and Rainsford building, which is the corner, which is truly Wapna Place.
Yes.
The other lots to the south of it are lots that were formed when the road was stopped in the 80s. And there's a small section to the very south of that, which is where the telecom building was. So that's sort of, and to be in the day-to-day operation, from council's perspective, we've called it Wapna Place because they all stick together. So that's, but I'm just saying is if you imagine if I drew a line where the bus would travel, the further you go to the north, the more it consumes the wider area and takes a path where you have to have potentially an interaction between the two.
Sure. Okay. Grant, and then. Yes,
Written it down, so
you've written it down. Oh,
read it, distract me. So through about the consultation piece, I went to the cycling thing for the city on Saturday night and purposely asked everyone I spoke to about Wapna Place, and no one was worried about Wapna Place going. Right. So I think we've got to be careful around the submissions that it's 171 people of 21,000 ratepayers and 50,000 people. So, and I've asked a number of people that talk to, and equally you have, and we've just got to balance out the submission piece versus the wider voice, and maybe that silent voice. But Russ, there's no way the buses can go to the south side of the clock.
As I said, equally, I believe the buses could go to the south side, but you would then equally compromise the opportunity. I guess the greatest opportunity could be for a space in front of the two restaurants, to be fair, which have no legal right to have space there. But it is the logical place that if you were going to have an outdoor dining area, you'd have it on that side of those premises. That's you read it, and it's the place which gets the maximum sun. It's the whole logical piece.
A curve too, wouldn't it?
It would be, but it's still quite a possible turn.
Because I think from the consultation, I've separated out the preserve Wapna legacy which, you know, come through loud and clear, I think, in the submissions, and the public space. And, you know, so I think we've somehow got to think about how we preserve that Wapna legacy, and John's drawing that he put up had a bigger space to the north side, which is where the 1A goes through. And what I seen in that was the ability to preserve that Wapna public space there, right? But I think in my mind, I've separated out the public space because very clearly the public wants somewhere that they can congregate somewhere in the city at some stage in the future. I don't know if it has to be tomorrow. And then a bit like Tom said, the TAS came through quite strong in the consultation for mine. I was quite surprised about how the heritage piece that they represent, how strongly that came through, and the clock equally. And so, to Alan's point, we've probably got to think through, you know, several of those things, separating out, preserve the Wapna, and where do we have a public space, and then if it means the clock goes, we need to make a commitment to put it up, not in the museum area. And the TAS, I'd like to think I understand that, you know, the issues around the earthquake thing, but, you know, it'd be nice to see them preserved too, based on what I've heard from some of the consultation, but that's just my summary of sort of.
I'll come across to Darren in a minute, and you're right. I think some previous advice we had was that if we went to the left of the clock, the turn would be too tight as we go into that space, and would involve more than one lane, so they'd swing out a little bit to get around that sort of right angle corner, where the other one going to the right of the clock, you can arc across, cut that slipway through. So it's
well, equally, if people are coming into the city from Levin Street on that south side, you've got a real conflict there if you're to the right, aren't you? Because the bus is there, whereas it's more central or 1A. You're sort of pushing the bus to one side, and the people have got a natural pathway.
I think what you're saying is strategically is, do you want to go around the clock or not? And I think there is a conversation about the clock. I met there with the one of the gentlemen previously from Bond Contracts, who actually rebuilt the clock and got the history of the clock, because the two guys who built it actually still are around town. And they found the clock mechanism in a box in the water tower in the 80s. And it had all the bits. It just had no shafts, nothing connected. They were just in a box. And that was how it was. And I guess what they did is they took the mechanisms and they actually put it together and figured out how to make it work. And I think most people who go and look at the clock actually see the mechanism with the pendulum swinging in a glass box that's sitting there. And that's a mechanism that could sit somewhere there or elsewhere. So I'm saying is that the mechanism itself is the piece that's really valuable to us. I think there's pieces of the bells and the clock faces, they all have versions of history, but the things that are actually the historic value are the bells, the clock faces, and the mechanism itself. Where it fits, how it goes, what it does is, I guess, in the 80s was deemed to be there. And if you look at the structure, it's quite a dominant structure. And I guess if you sit back a little bit and say, what does it actually want? What does it actually mean to us? Is that really its place? Is that the right place? But most people, when they go there, they look at the clock mechanism in a glass box. And at the moment, if you look around there, there's quite a lot of work to be done. We haven't had a lot of love in that area, and it does need a lot. And it's one of those lovely clocks that needs somebody who goes every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock and adjusts the time to correct it. And that's what these guys have done for the last 25 or 30 years, unseen, unbeknown to our community. Up until recently, or more recent times, 10 years, they've adjusted that clock every Sunday morning, popped in and just opened the door, climbed in, set it back to 11 o'clock, and away she went. And none of us were any the wiser that someone was adjusting it. And
so I'm going to come to you in a minute, Darren. And you're right, Grant. I think one of the things we had when we went out to consultations, we were required to give a preference. So we did that, even though we tried to qualify it. I think if we've gone out and said, look, don't want to touch Wagner, it's a precious gem in the middle of the city. We want the bus to go in off Lemon Street, we probably would have got just as many people coming in and saying, what a waste of space that is. Look, why don't you just bolt it over and modernise it? But because we had the preference that people only the people that disagree with us tend to come in.
Yeah.
That's been my experience. We had the same stuff with the museum as well. Whatever tack you take on the museum, the detractors want to come in. The ones supporting just think, oh, well, council will do what they want anyway.
Yeah.
Darren.
Kind of sidetracked, but not, and that's the conversation around Jeff and his expected contribution. And having stayed at a few hotels across the years, I guess the thing that intrigues me most about this one is that Jeff, who's a businessman, is capitalizing on an opportunity that exists now that didn't previously. And that is to exploit the increasing number of reasons to stay in Invercargill, to not only get people to his hotel, but to stay for more than one night. So there are those tour companies who sweep through, they arrive in at night. You've gone and done your package tour, you get to your room, you go into town, you have a meal at a cafe, you come back, go to bed, and at 7 o'clock, you're back out again for a buffet breakfast. That's not necessarily what I see him trying to do. There'll be people who'll be leveraging off to Stewart Island, but there are an increasing number of people who are using the facilities in town to stay for a while. And that's why normally I go, look, if a lot of this, and apart from the replacement of the infrastructure, is about facilitating things that benefit Jeff's business, I'm not a great fan of that. But at the same time, as a business person, I go, well, I'd like to see a little return on my investment into the community as well. And so that's how I can live with reshaping what it is at Wagner Place. Peter and I have been challenged by submissions over many years when you get lobbied, and there's a degree of having to learn how to filter the noise without ignoring what it is that's being said. The people who are really passionate about Wagner Place that presented, and those are the ones who will resonate in your mind, as opposed to those that hopefully you've read who didn't want to speak to theirs, are talking about things historic and not things that have happened there recently. And grand plans about getting school choirs to come down and sing are not couched in reality at all, because you try and get a school who's prepared to get a bunch of kids onto a bus after filling out the paperwork and getting all the consent, you've got a bloody miracle, let alone to come and entertain who for 20 minutes. Sure, you could do some things, and really the last big thing, apart from public protests, and they are the most frequent events that happen in Wagner Place, and I think we need to recognise there needs to be a space for that voice to be expressed, because we don't want it outside our bloody building like we had for a while. There's some need for that, but the Buskers Festival was the last thing that went on there. Bands don't want to play there. It's not an entertainment venue. The only time kids gather there is before they do the Orange Walk, which is all the pedestrian crossing kids, and they walk from there down to here. And then Nobby will give them an ice cream, send them on their way. And, but that's it. So couching that history, but finding a way. I think it's absolutely essential that we do continue to recognise the Wagner history. I'm a little more ambivalent about the towers of knowledge or the pillars of knowledge or whatever they are.
Celtic things.
Celtic's a football team, and not a very good one. I know.
No.
I'm intrigued. I'm more a United person. I'm intrigued by the fact that there is the potential road hazard, which, you know, across all that time I've never really thought of, but depending on which way the earth is moving, it's probably very real. But given the event that would take to bring them down, there's probably a reasonable degree of masonry that's going to be hitting State Highway 6 as well. So it's not going to be an easy discussion tomorrow. Ahead of it, I think one of the things that will probably come out if we have the same kind of conversation that we're having today is that people will see their councils considered all options. And that's the stuff you should sleep easy about, remember to express.
So I've got one question for you then. And it's really around that, I think you partially answered it before, but it's a little bit around that. If we consult on 3 options and those 3 options are quite specific, can we go to a 1A, a 2A, a 3A, or whatever? I think we can, that's the advice
I
I've been
believe
given,
we
but,
can,
okay.
Without going back.
without going back.
And
Because
that's a
we
requirement
are
by the government.
amending what we put forward based on the feedback that we've had.
And that's a local government requirement.
Is it-
That you consult and you can't deviate too much from the consult.
Oh, no, it's on the degree of deviation.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you're coming up with something that is completely blue sky,
Yeah,
wasn't raised or suggested.
Yeah.
Through the consultation and feedback,
yeah, lips are.
that would be different, but you had people presenting different
Yeah,
different options for the traffic flow, and so you're expanding on
Yeah.
that in your consideration of what it is where you want to land.
yeah,
You could justify it because submissions raised it.
yeah, you picked up on this.
Right.
So
Barry.
provided we're in the same fiscal envelope and within the same sort of
Yeah,
dialogue, we would be okay.
The
Yeah.
scale hasn't
Yeah.
really changed.
yeah.
They're very far away.
Yeah, I'm quite happy with a 1A solution to that. As Trish said, and we've all seen what the infrastructure changes have got to be with new pipe work and everything. One of those pipe work, I think it was the septic line, goes right in the middle of that clock.
But we could get under it though with a bit of luck, couldn't we?
Yes, he said yes to that at the last meeting.
He did, yeah.
Blow it through, I think is what he
Yeah.
referred to.
Just to probably put a little bit more, I've spoken at length with our drainage teams, and the sewer main does go under the clock foundation base. So the pipe is relatively deep. There are certainly techniques that would allow us to be able to avoid having to dig a big hole. It may well be that there are those, we use those more extensively. Yes, just to reflect a little bit, that was the technique we had originally planned to use in the Esk Street between Kelvin and D Street, because we believed it was going to be fast, cost efficient, and a great way to do it. When we started and actually did some further investigation, the pipe wasn't suitable. But for a short length through there, it is quite possible. You can either burst the pipe, drill the pipe, pull the pipe. There's ways to get under the clock on the way past. So in terms of the level of disruption of the services, we just need to make sure that we understand once we start Wapna Place and how we tie that in. And that's, to be fair, no different than anywhere else. We'll try to make good whatever the level of finish is going back. If I could be perhaps just a little bit of room here, I would really like to make sure that we actually understand the clear direction around the clock, because 1A or otherwise, I just need to, I guess my preference is I need to understand what sort of design we have to do.
Sure.
But it's around what we actually have to go around rather than what the design looks like. And I
So
think
you'll
the
get that
purpose,
tomorrow.
the purpose of what Wapna Place is one of the key things that we have consulted on.
So Pania, I'm gonna come back to you about the fiscal stuff, because somebody said that before. In a minute, Pania.
I just wanted to sort of come back to what Grant said around, all ratepayers, and other people. And I've spoken to lots of people and about Wapna Place as well. And I mean, you're right, there is that historical type attachment, but there's also that one of the things that we haven't sort of talked about is really the wind tunnel. Literally, we really haven't, if we opened up the whole thing in any way or form. The other thing is we were just talking about footpaths on north or south or both. So really that's going to determine if we make a decision on 1 or 1A. My preference has always been 2 Leamington Street, because I think that the developer, could have easily put a door on the side of that and entered that way for that reason. I think with the infrastructure that's needing to happen, which you've just spoken about, it's not meaning that we're needing to rip up the whole of Wapna Place to do that infrastructure. It's a piece of that, correct?
It's 2 strips, yep.
It's just 2 strips, yeah. I mean, in any like replacement infrastructure, it would be within that area, so not really the whole concept. But like I said, I think it's important we also take in consideration those that who actually did go along and put in a submission. I think it's still important to listen to their voices.
We did, we have,
Yeah,
including. the
but I'm
winter.
just saying, you know,
Strips is, 2 strips of 2 meters, it's about 4 meters.
and the majority was,
Never
So,
seen five
um,
for the-
That doesn't matter,
like that.
Tony.
I know that, but I'm just saying.
So just on the issue of the wind, I went back to Bob Simpson again, and I know people are gonna get upset with me even talking to him at times. Cause, but he actually gave me some very good advice, which I already knew about anyway, which means that as wind hits the structure, it's not like water. Water hits the structure, it then spreads out. Wind doesn't. If it hits the structure, it goes over the top. As you stand on the leeward side, you get the shelter, but it eventually comes down. And you see that as wind passes over the Southern Alps, it does exactly that. So I said to him, so how far up would I go before that wind just becomes normal again? And he said, by the time you get to the other side of D Street, the wind will come over the structure and pick up speed again. So if you take it out, you'll get a wind tunnel effect right with the old stages. And I know that because I've walked through that for about 10 years. But once you get to S Street, the wind that you got there will not be affected by the structure or not by the structure, because the structure is not all that high. Taking out the clock, the structure on the side of the clock's not that high.
Everybody's forgetting what Lovey said before too, like that structure is so ugly from behind.
It's terrible.
If you ever had a look at it, so it really, it makes the whole bottom of S Street, that bit of street there. It's terrible, horrible.
But taking out a piece of it and making it beautification.
Do it up, make
making
it attractive.
Yeah.
Just remember if the clock was to remain, you will need to remove, I believe, both sides of the infrastructure. The clock would have to sit as a standalone piece in the middle, because pedestrians or people leaving the hotel aren't necessarily going to try to funnel through where the buses are.
Yep.
So you will end up with quite a wide opening, and that could in fact, I'm not a wind engineer, but you just have to watch that you don't actually make it worse.
Yeah.
I also think that Councillor Arnold's right, is when you stand at Lower East Street, in the 80s, we destined a lot of those buildings to actually have less patronage and we shut them off from the city, to be fair with what we did. And I guess the back of them hasn't necessarily been, I guess, given too much treatment from a view of how, if you stood there, what would it look like? And I think any of the proposals will need to actually have some consideration of how does it actually connect? And I guess that's what we're saying is, how does this piece of street actually continue? We've been pretty brave to actually attack Esk Don Street, and I don't think we realise as a city how brave we have been to take on what we've done and get there, and I guess for my own self-provision, survive the retailers, because to be fair, you go everywhere else and what we've done is something huge compared to what we would otherwise do. Queenstown, Dunedin, I mean, the disruption that we have been able to get through as a city and actually come out the other end and have something magnificent. What we need to do is make sure we actually understand fully how we connect on there. And I guess John Green, if he was here, I'm sure he'll be saying is make sure you're as brave as we have been to actually achieve that, because to be fair, as a city, we have been pretty brave to do what we do. I guess it's actually, how do you put that in that decision-making process?
Yeah, sorry, down the end too, you've got 3 buildings now. You've got the railway station, which is recognised, even though it's built in 75, it's recognised a historic building. You've got the Railway Hotel, which is probably one of the best examples of Victorian building in Invercargill, that's had to put up with all that for years and years and years. And now you got this new hotel that's just on the other side. I mean, that whole end of that bit of street is actually quite a magnificent. There's magnificent things around there. It's just going to get better and better. I mean, it's great.
So Russell,
done.
the other side is the issue of the fiscal estimates that are in there. That's a pain factor for this council, I guess, for want of a better words. I noticed in your paper that goes forward to tomorrow, it does talk about some potential to reduce. I mean, I just can't understand if we go to option 1, and And if we're only paying up to where the clock currently is, and if we're not factoring in infrastructure, your infrastructure, road, underground stuff, how it can be $15 million.
Mr. Day and I have had a conversation about how I want to answer this question with it
Yeah.
coming, and I guess that's, and with care, I guess what we understand is that the developer has responsibilities to reinstate the damage that he's done on Lower East Street.
Sure.
Because we've given him the opportunity to use some of those areas to construct, which isn't unusual. We've done that elsewhere, so that's why there's gates and those sorts of things. There is a need to reinstate back to what, I guess, a like for like. Anything beyond that, I guess we haven't necessarily factored into it. I asked the quantity surveyors who did the work with us on Don and Esk Street to prepare us an estimate that allowed for what a full refurbishment of Wapna Place and a full refurbishment of East Street to a standard that looked like East Street, but was of the cost and quality of Don Street with inflation. So I'm trying to get the best of everything, and that's what the 14.6. At this stage, we haven't necessarily identified what the cost allocation would be through that process beyond that. But what we do know is that there are certain areas within the Lower East Street piece from the clock to 11th Street and around 11th Street where the developer has a responsibility to reinstate. You might say, what does that mean? If you'd been down there, that the surface that we had were paving blocks circa 1986 that were crumbling, there were planting gardens. So the level that we would actually reinstate it, that he could reinstate it to, might well be well below what I guess any visitor to our city might expect. So I guess that's the question.
Can I ask Chair? I don't understand that one, because clearly he is not going to put down old broken bits of, right? He's got to lay a new piece of road. Can he put down an old piece of road? Unless he's got it up held up somewhere and he's going to put it back down. He's going to put down a new road. And that's the only thing that's required in Lower East Street. We don't need anything else other than that.
And I guess that's the design standard of what we actually want to do, is tie it in. How much beautification, how many gardens we want. That's what we need to do. And that could well be no cost to the city. But that's, I guess, part of what you need to actually negotiate and understand where that is.
I guess my unease is when I look at all three options, they all come with very large price ranges. And just speaking personally for myself, if I think that Wapna doesn't have any intrinsic value to the city, and others will argue otherwise, but for me it doesn't serve a purpose going forward. Why the hell would I be putting 14, 15, 16 million dollars into it? Don't quite get that. But anyway, just I sidetrack Peter.
Yeah, on the day of the submissions, one of the submitters, namely Bob Simpson, he wasn't correct with what he said, and you said you've spoke to him since.
Sure.
That the wind goes up and comes straight down. Well, it does not.
No, I didn't say that. Well, no, it's
Well,
not.
he said it. He
No,
said
no.
it comes down.
No, what he said was, if you take that as being the Southern Alps, sitting in the South Island, the wind goes up there. It doesn't stay up there. It eventually drops down. Wind does that. If you sit right in there, you've got shelter. So
If
how
you've got
far do you go
lights.
there before the wind just becomes the normal, and that makes no difference at all.
You go right up, I'll tell you. I done a reading of the wind.
Yep.
On the 26th of October at noon.
Yep.
And it was a very strong, direct westerly wind. 53, the reading was. I go into Wapna Place, and actually a fella asked me what I was doing. It was Mr. Hurley that throws his hat in the air.
Yep.
And I told him I was measuring the wind. I go up East Street, and the wind was steady. It wasn't Bluff Street, it was steady, 53k. I go up outside Westpac in the middle of the street. It was between 15 and 18 k's. So it hadn't all come down.
Right.
And you go right up to the the old Cambridge Place entrance
Mhm.
into the
Mm.
new mall, still reading. And it was between 15 and 18, right up there until you come to the Calvin Hotel. And it was just full through. So what he's saying is not correct. It doesn't all come in. Where does it go? I'm buggered if I know. But my
Well, I guess
what my
forget
my
that,
little
but
gadget
now-
measures the wind is accurate to 2 degrees.
if you watch car racing frames, like a good example, when they test cars, they have those wind tunnels that you go into, and you can track the airflow. And air will move over a car, but it does drop off when it doesn't move over at this height, because that's the height of the car, and stay there. Because otherwise you have a negative force back there.
Well, that's how wind's created. It's 2 different variations in pressure.
Yep.
So by putting a structure in place, you create an air pressure thing in the subject, because it's a low pressure and a high pressure.
I don't think any of us have a clue,
No.
actually.
Well, I tell you what, I use.
We really should get, I mean.
I've
if
got
we-
a clue. I've got facts.
No, I wasn't meaning up here. What I was meaning is in terms of, you know,
We're
the-
not
the
engineers.
engineering of wind, whatever they call it, I don't even know what they're naming it, right?
Saying,
But clearly there will be experts that you could get, advisors, and that. If that was a real concern, you could get experts. Nobody in this room's an expert. Bob Simpson's certainly not an expert, because he and I talked about it too. He doesn't know either, really. He's just expressing an opinion, same as we are.
I use my anemometer. There you are. Here it is. Accurate 2%. I've done it. I've logged it. I've logged the other days too. So I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. I learned something then. So throughout, I get what you mean, Darren, about submitters. I mean, I was originally in favour of option 2, so that we could satisfy the needs of our city, plus that of being realistic into what the developer requires. But since then, thinking about the columns and how people want to hold on to that the feeling out there in the public is that they don't want us to chuck out their history and be inconsiderate to the very people that Watna Place is named after. So I'm in favour of keeping the columns where they are. I never thought I'd say that, but I have since changed my mind. The clock tower and reading the history behind that and knowing the 2 gentlemen that fixed that in the 1980s and then again looking after it since then. I mean, I am in favour of moving it to somewhere in a better location to give us a more modern, beautiful Watna Place. The 14.6 million that's been estimated is only an estimate. None of those costs are actual set in stone yet. They're not concrete, as to what I understand with the report. So, you know, that cost could go down or that cost could go up. But since sitting here and looking at your option 1A and looking at the structure that is around that clock, I'm also in favour of keeping it where it is and taking down the areas that are beautifying it, like the concrete panelled areas, the back of it, so that it can be beautified, modernised, and that side for the bus to go through, maybe some curved walls around here to break that structure of that wind blowing through. I completely and utterly know that when you're behind there, it is ugly. So we're going to need to do something anyway, regardless. So we need to think about it strategically, cost effectively. What would be the best way to deal with this, and where we are still taking in mind what the general public that did submit, because they are the voices that bothered to come here, and others that have actually said that they want to see it beautified. They want to either see the clock stay or go, fix, modernise the columns. The problem that I've heard the argument too is that nothing happens there. One of the submitters got it right. It's because it's not attractive. We don't actually draw any draw cards there. I've been there for many times protesting political.
Me too.
Oh, I've been there many times. I've been there with Southland Girls High School when we went there to discuss or make the public aware of issues that we were having, to keep the red shoes or not. So I've been there many times, Plunket, mothers with babies with car seats, a mother that came to all of our schools around New Zealand to make sure that we were cycling with hats on because her son was killed. That has been utilised, but our needs have changed in the future. We've got digital play, taking part in our kids' lives, that they're not there as often as what they used to be. There used to be a video arcade that I'd go and jam Space Invader games at JR's or whatever it was called across the road. You know, so I do understand that we haven't, and it may be that there's a flavour or appetite within this building that it's not utilised now that we've got Esk and Don Street. But your public are going to want to go protesting somewhere. Are the shopkeepers going to be happy for us to do that right outside their shops on East Street? Are they going to be happy that there's congregations happening where people are not happy? Unions want to argue over the low wages of our healthcare sector. You know, so I think that we can make this work. We just have to be really smart about it and make sure that we're delivering to all of our community and the developer, but make sure there's a healthy balance.
That's a short history of Rue's life.
What happened with the red shoes?
Yeah.
I've still got
Still
mine.
got red shoes.
They're still there.
I've still got mine.
Tradition is important.
Oh, it's
Shoes
nothing like
survive
protesting.
everything.
So, but what was important then, Rhea? Was it important
You could,
that you protested or that you want to remember the place that you protested?
it was important that where you went, that you knew that you could hook into the sound system, that you knew that as you were protesting and you had your microphone or what have you, your boards, that you were visual from the traffic coming past. People would honk their horns in support of you. So, you know, that was your gathering point.
Do you see
One of the
in the
things-
designs though, anywhere where that couldn't happen?
Well, I'm thinking if we're going to modernize it, and if we do keep the clock where it is,
Because
Take it.
the protests are all right up against the street. They don't sit back under.
No.
the shelter.
mostly when you are speaking to your protests and your gatherers, you're inside this
You're on the
area here.
stage.
You're always on the stage.
And then.
And then
you
the
go
people,
into
the public are out and they are either on the side with their placards or what have you.
street.
Yeah, and so you are utilising that wider space as well, depending like the TPPA, massive protests there. You know, and there were hundreds of people there. We can't ignore that. When you are emotively like consumed to do something about what the best of your country is for the future, you'll get your feet down there, right? And you will protest.
And one of the things Rhea is saying is, I think, that at the moment, we aren't offering anywhere else for that purpose.
So
We have, the place is
East Street.
still
East
the
Street.
only place to do that.
And safely.
The next stage in East Street.
No.
there is.
No,
not-
is it, are you
not
talking
for
about,
what- Not for what Rhea and I
No.
have experienced as the.
Well, you're just gonna stand on it and talk.
you can't go down Don Street because there's a courthouse. You
East
know?
Street, there's a stage in East Street.
Where is it? I walk down all the time, never
It's
seen
a
it.
huge wooden thing.
Been there-
It's flat thing, you know,
That's
like
not
this.
a stage.
That's not a
It's not
stage.
a stage, it's a thing.
That's just a, yeah. That's not a stage. Go to other cities and
Oh,
you'll see a
world
stage.
Take
Shakespeare.
the PPT.
Right.
PPA one
I
as
think
an
by the other-
example.
It was
and you would
massive.
Never fit
Yeah.
that into Esk Street.
No, you
as a
wouldn't.
current- yeah.
You wouldn't fit it into East Street.
Evelyn's gonna have the last,
Education
No.
council.
And then just
No.
about the columns with that seismic testing with the 32%. Why was it?
34%.
Sorry,
No, the results say below 34%, which means it's not legal.
okay,
Well,
so
It's
Go ahead.
debatable because we haven't. done
yeah.
the
Yes,
foundation work.
Yeah. That's all right. But
Because they haven't
as
got
I
the-
said, we don't need to have that
Okay.
discussed tomorrow.
Yeah.
We can leave that till the 28th or whenever.
You needed a clock.
Eh?
You don't need clocks anymore. Everybody's got a clock in their pocket.
But there's nothing like.
It's the movement, it's the movement.
Yeah, it's like
You have
that.
to walk, Peter, it's a lot cheaper.
No, not the movement of a person, the movement of.
Right,
mechanism of the
Evelyn's
clock.
gonna have the last say and then we're going home because we're gonna have this debate again tomorrow.
Sorry, I drew it.
Evelyn, your last chance?
Last word to the birthday lady.
Happy birthday to
birthday. Yes, thank you.
to me.
Your shout, we're going to the pub.
Mr. Ludlow, I'm going to defriend you. No, I think the thing, the cost involved in the standard, maintaining the standard of design and presentation is actually an important part of this discussion. And the commitment that we haven't got from the developer is whether that is a place that he is prepared to meet us at. So if we, as a council, as a community, agree to option 1 or 1A, which allows the buses through there, then we will be obligated to elevate the design in Lower Esk Street to meet that of at least, as somebody said the other day, that of Don Street. So not quite as high perhaps as Upper Esk Street, but so that's the things like the rain gardens and the quality of the seating and all those sorts of things. Now, if that's what we're prepared to commit to, we've got to be prepared to pay that on our own, because there is no guarantee that the developer will meet us at that place. And I think that that in itself is something that, if I'm thinking as a resident and a citizen of this place, that I am concerned about, that we're being asked to make that investment, not because we are choosing to, but because that is a consequence of the decision that we're going to have to make. Now, if we don't make the decision to allow buses through, if we say that that is the developer's responsibility and he does it in the areas that he already owns, which is both sides of Lower Esk Street, then the consequences of the costs are different. They're the costs of relocation of the clock, or upgrading of the clock tower, or redesigning the furbishments of Wapna Place. And that's a whole different discussion, and probably still a reasonably expensive cost, but could be more staged and, you know, not so forced. I feel like we're being forced, and that's a position I find myself uncomfortable about, that it's not a decision that we've come to organically because that's what we chose, but that we're being made to make this decision out of sequence with what we had planned. So leaving aside all the things that I like about the historic things, the value that I see in young people being able to see the mechanics of the clock, all those sorts of things, which I see value in, and I've expressed that, but being purely pragmatic on behalf of this council, if we are going to maintain the quality, because Russell talked about how brave we have been as a council in the last few years about the decisions, and we're reaping the benefit of that in terms of what people are saying about our inner city development. We would be letting ourselves down if anything that we do on the other side of Esk Street is not of the same standard. So that's, you know, the cost of that. And do we take it down to Levin Street? If we have to take it down to Levin Street with no guarantee of any and co-investment by the developer, that's the risk that you're deciding tomorrow, isn't it really?
Well, I'm not sure about that. And one of the things we had some discussion a couple of weeks ago about whether we would try and factor in some commitment from Jeff to what he would do or wouldn't do. And I said no to that, because I think that the moment you allow his dollars to become involved, you're accused of him buying the city council, buying your votes. If we want to risk taking the clock out and going through, we risk that we have to upgrade. If he contributes, that's great. If he doesn't, he doesn't. We can certainly be forceful with him, but he will certainly have to repair what he's done down there to a certain standard. Now, it may not be a replica of what we've currently got in Esk Street, and that's where the debate will come in, but he certainly won't just be able to leave it hocus pocus and just, because he wouldn't want to do that. He'd devalue his whole property by doing it. A tough decision for tomorrow. And I guess the way we'll probably approach it is look at the options and have a vote on the options. 1, 2, potentially 3 if you want to have 3 in, but it seems like it's 1 or 2. If the option is in favour of 1, and only if it's in favour of 1, then I'll put up the option of a 1A as a consideration. And whether you've got an appetite to have that, if that's the option. If the option is 2, then 2 it is.
We have one a B,
Sorry,
1A and a 1B, possibly a 1B
1B,
option.
to be or not to be?
A 1B, like, you know, 1A option.
To be, yeah.
Option 1, option 2.
No, I think the
1B.
process I'll use is to eliminate. The process will be buses or traffic through Wapna or not. And that's satisfied by 1 or 2. And if we've got a tolerance for 1, then we can decide a bit more about what 1 looks like. And I'm open to having some discussion about 1 or 1A. And if somebody's got some modification that's a little bit more insightful, so be it, we'll have the discussion. But I'd like us to make a decision tomorrow and
So
not.
there'll be
keep
no one
thinking.
B.
Well, you can try
your
one B if you
1B?
want to.
What should one be?
Move the clock.
Yeah, but if,
No,
if,
yeah.
yeah,
Then
but,
can we have a one
but
C?
Alan, if we take the clock out and move it, we'll be, in effect, will just be one.
Yeah.
Because that's what one does. One just takes everything out. And opens up a one-way street.
Or keep the columns and still stuff around.
I like the columns director.
Yeah, the columns are another debate for another time, because we need advice on that.
But option one goes, what I'm saying is option one goes through the columns at this stage. You could get rid of the clock and still stuff around
Yeah,
and keep the columns. So it doesn't.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the columns are irrelevant to one or two tomorrow. Really is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So columns is, if it's one, they've gone.
No,
No.
no, columns are out of it altogether.
Yeah.
Some of this comes-
We discuss it at a later stage
Yeah.
when we get some more advice from
It
Russell.
needs to be-
Sorry? Well, no, as you heard Russell say, regardless of whether you go to one or one A, we will get some design features back from Russell and from John Green's team to say what it would look like. Core issue is traffic through or no traffic.
Just a reminder to council that currently 2 does not have the clock in it either. 2 is Wapna redevelopment, so you might, if you're considering 2, you might want a 2A, which is clock staying as well, so
Impact the structure.
just a reminder of that 2 is a redevelopment of Wapna. No buses going through, but also no clock there at the moment, so you might want to do it.
Gotcha.
And I think the report actually says that with a preference for, I think that's what it actually, if you read the recommendation, it says
Yep.
it's recommended to be delete one with council having a preference for. It says, I think, if I recall rightly, it says to retain the clock, retain the column. So just, and I guess the intention is that you can modify that
Yeah.
as you see fit during your debate.
Sure.
Some interesting tactical voting tomorrow, I think.
Yep.
Headache.
Still a new